Hey, podcast listener, even if you are alone in your entrepreneurial journey, know that today, right now in your earbuds, you are joined by thousands of entrepreneurs from all around the globe seeking to grow better, more profitable, location-independent businesses. If you'd like to learn more about what we do and download our entire back catalog, check out tropicalmba.com. Yeah, buddy, thanks for joining us on the Tropical MBA podcast. I'm on the horn with the man with whom I am on the horn with often. It's my business partner, the CEO of our fine organization, the man we call the boss man. How you doing, boss man?
Dan, I am doing very well. Waiting for you here in Prague. You're supposed to be here in T-minus 2 days. You're only a sweater away, my friend.
True story, yeah. There's sort of a badge of honor at showing up to a cold place with shorts on. It's a digital nomad honor. I will be flying to Prague. Hopefully I'll have a pair of pants in my new Manal bag. We are preparing a talk for the fine people at MicroConf, so I'm looking forward to presenting there as well as meeting all the other intelligent attendees, and meanwhile preparing for our big show on October 18th in Bangkok. Looking forward to that. This week on the show, we are talking to Jesse, the Dominator Lawler, a guy we work with on a daily basis. And actually, I heard you guys have an interesting new tool that you've been employing. What's the story there?
Yeah, so Jesse and I have been working, hopefully, to launch our app this week. I can't wait to start talking about it and stop calling it the app on this podcast, but I want to make sure it's at least got a somewhat decent website up before we do that. But yeah, we've been interfacing through HipChat. I was introduced to HipChat via Simon Payne from leadpages.com. Those guys are absolutely crushing it. Just raised $5 million last week. Anyways,
amazing.
HipChat
Where's the applause
is how Simon
effect?
Communicates with his developers. It's basically a more sophisticated Skype without the calling feature. So it's a chat client where you can ping people, and it has a little bit of a file management system. So I am finding it to be very nice, but I'm only about a week into it.
Very cool. You know, a lot of people are going to look at this Simon Payne and Clay Collins getting the $5 million and say, well, 9 months, they must have really been in the right place at the right time and stuff. No. They were in what I call a good place at a good time, which is these guys have been working on their craft for years and years. Simon is a brilliant developer. Clay is an excellent marketer with an excellent market sense. I started reading his blog in 2007. So these guys were just poised. You know, they had everything. This was something good was bound to happen to these guys, in other words. You know, it's not like they made a really clever pitch or had this brilliant idea or whatever. No, they always had good ideas. These guys had good ideas since I first started hearing them.
Yeah, exactly. And these guys have been in the game for such a long time. You know, Clay Collins is one of the original gangsters of internet marketing. So he's been aligning himself for several years to be where they're at now.
An original gangster. That's like he's been an internet marketer for over 5 years.
Yeah.
So hey, if you're not in the game yet and you're thinking that's about as long as it took me to get through college, and that really didn't get me anywhere. So look at you know, if you join the internet marketing sphere in 5 years, who knows where you could be, especially given that it does seem like, Ian, things are happening faster. I'm seeing people develop businesses and successful online presences faster. You know, technology's better, the marketplaces are educated. So I don't know if it's true or not, but you know, I used to say 1,000 days, maybe now I'd say 850 days.
850. You heard it from Mr. Andrews.
All right. Speaking of world domination, this week we're doing a deep dive with Jesse Lawler, founder of Smart Drug Smarts and a bunch of other stuff, working with us on this new application. And he's got a great story and a lot to share with us about making distributed software teams. So let's get started. My guest today, Jesse Lawler, distinguished by many things, just a few to list. You are my business partner, which I think that's pretty distinguished.
I'm happy to be able to add that to my little resume.
You are a guinea pig for smart drugs. You do self-experiments, and you post these self-experiments on your blog, smartdrugsmarts.com. You have the nickname The Dominator because your reputation is as one who dominates. You used to be a film director and producer. You have an IMDb profile.
I do have an IMDb profile. I think I still Google for it.
I'm just getting started. You've built productivity apps for David Allen, the Godfather.
Also true.
You have moved to Ho Chi Minh City. You have built an offshore development team. What it is, your main company, Evil Genius Technologies, builds iPhone applications, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's iPhone, it's iPad, it's web application. There's even a little bit of Android that comes out every now and then. But yeah, it's we sort of try to be a one-size-fits-all custom software shop.
So I have a lot that I want to ask you. I think we can go over a broad range of things. In particular, I'm interested in distributed teams. I'm interested in some health tips. I'm interested in how you get business and how people can make great iPhone apps. But
if I can tie all those together in one sentence, this is going to be the best interview ever.
We've got time. Let's back up. I want to hear about your entrepreneurial journey. I met you at the TMBA last summer.
Yeah.
So we've known each other for a year. You were a speaker at DC Berlin last year. You flew the whole way around the world in order to come to TCPKK.
Yeah, that's true. I think it was a 50-hour plane flight on that one, or series of, yeah.
Take me back to the time when you were living in Los Angeles, making movies. That's basically like being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, there's something sort of inherently, well, I don't want to say entrepreneurial about filmmaking, but it's a real weird, economy there, because so many people in that city that work in the film industry, it's like you'll have a nice high-paying job for like 6 weeks to 6 months while you're on a film, and then everybody is fired, and that's the nature of the beast. And then everybody, collects unemployment. Like, even if you've been making like a 6-figure salary or the equivalent, like, then you collect unemployment for a couple of weeks or a couple of months until you get your next big job, and then get the next thing. So it's a really interesting, I guess, ecology to that economy that
I've noticed that everybody in Los Angeles is really friendly. And I think there must be something connected there, because when you go to a bar, you think, oh yeah, maybe everybody in Los Angeles is going to be snotty. But instead, they're kind of like, hey, how are you? What is it that you're doing? And they're kind of curious because maybe they need the next job or they need the next gig. Did you notice that when you were there?
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny city because, I mean, we could talk for hours about Los Angeles. But, unlike New York, where like the upper end of the pecking order in New York is like the bankers and they all dress a certain way, like the upper end of the pecking order in Los Angeles is still these like artist types that sometimes they're wearing flip-flops and sneakers and looking like something the cat dragged in, and so you never really know who you're talking to. So I think people have sort of learned to be careful about that. And then also so many of the jobs for the people that are sort of the creative set, trying to be an actor, be a musician, be a model, be a one of those types of things, they are sort of non-falsifiable skill sets in a way. And so a lot of it deals with like, can you convince somebody that they like you enough that they want to work with you? It's not like you show them like a provable, like, here's my credentials, like this piece of paper proves that I can act. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's not like that. So relationships really matter a lot in that town.
I like that about entrepreneurship, that in some ways it's not, you can talk all you want, but if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. The same thing with a great computer program. I mean, it either solves a problem or it doesn't. When you were doing all this Hollywood stuff, I'm assuming hookers and blow.
10 years of my life, all this Hollywood stuff. It's like, shit, is that what it amounts to? Yeah.
Hanging out at the Viper Room or whatever it is you guys did. Did you see yourself as an entrepreneur? Did you portend this? Now you're this digital nomad. You run a business that's successful with tons of employees and stuff. How many employees do you have now?
Right now there's 10 of us, I think. It might have just jumped to 11, but it kind of floats around in there. There's a good handful of full-timers and then a few sort of as-needed, recurring cast of characters, I guess, to keep.
Tell me about the transition. When did you start to think maybe the California movie thing won't work?
Yeah, well, this is probably the most dramatic part of the story because it's definitely sort of like my personal crash and burn is the 2008 financial crisis hit and everybody just, lost their shirt. The people that would typically be investors in independent film projects, which are like a notoriously risky investment. It's one of these things where you either lose 100% of your money or you make 10 times your money. Mm-hmm. And so people invest in that, but it's always a gamble, and the people that do know it's a gamble. So after, everybody had just, lost a significant portion of their, what they thought was their safe money when the stock market crashed, just nobody wanted to roll the dice on independent films anymore. And so, I was producing small budget films for, television and stuff like that. And, the people that you would normally knock on the doors is like, your job as a film producer is when you're not actively producing a film, you're raising money for the next film. And so I'd finished one film, I was in that raising money for the next one cycle, and it was just a time when nobody wanted to stroke a check for an independent film. And so I kind of, pretty much entirely wasted my 2010 and 2000, like half of 2009, just sort of knocking on doors and getting doors slammed in my face, rhetorically, just time and time again. And eventually, enough of that, I was like, as much as I still do love film, I was tired of working a full day's work and not really having anything to show for it at the end of the day. And so I was like, I'm just watching my savings dwindle and figured it was time to transition into something else, at least long enough for the economy to sort of lick its own wounds and get people back, interested in investing in film again, so I could sort of start that process over. I transitioned into computer programming because that was what I had done. My college degree was in computer programming. I had done that for years. It was something that, even though the languages had changed since I'd sort of been out of that game, I knew that hopefully all those synapses hadn't died from the hookers and blow in LA. And so, and I was lucky in that it was a pretty smooth transition back into that.
Were you terrified, or were you just like, hey, I got to do this? Because I think a lot of people have trouble with the sunk cost.
Yeah.
You had so much of your life invested into the filmmaking.
It was like, I can't really stress how hard that was, more psychologically than anything else, because, I had really thought of myself as like Jesse the filmmaker. Everybody thought of Jesse as, he's the guy living in LA making these movies. The each one's a little bit bigger than the last. He's on this trajectory, headed to do this thing, and to have to fold up the towel on that and really do just like a radical life change was painful. It was a really, really painful thing. And one of these like, wow, have I just wasted a decade of my life? You kind of, I assume it's like the old person on the deathbed thinking, oh, was it all worth it? Sort of the 30-year-old's version of that. But I guess the happy ending to that story is actually the transition into technology went very smoothly. And, within a couple of months was, earning good money doing that, and, had enough freelance work coming in that I could have been billing myself out 24 hours a day if I could work 24 hours a day. And so I started hiring people and eventually...
you can work 24 hours a day, which we'll get to that at the end of the episode. Tell me about those initial, when you hung your shingle out and you said, my name's Jesse, I'm a technologist. How did it go from that moment to you running a business? How did you get traction with those first few clients and cash flow?
Well, the trick is to charge more than you need to live on, and luckily technology is something that allows you to do that. It was weird. I mean, the first couple of projects I did, I guess, in technology were things that I did pretty much for free, kind of as learning projects for me, because, again, I was learning languages, computer languages that I hadn't used previously in my earlier iteration.
Like the Apple stuff.
As a professional programmer. Yeah, like when I had gone full bore into film, like the iPhone hadn't even come out yet.
Right.
And so at this point, I pop out the other end of my film career. I've got this cool iPhone. I don't know how to program it, but I like my iPhone. I'm like, somebody is programming the apps on this thing. I should figure out how that works. But I needed a couple projects to kind of like, get my teeth sharp again. And so I could just kind of figured I should hang the shingle out there, say, hey, I'm Jesse. I'm willing to do this pretty much just for the experience of learning and getting a couple things on the resume. And the first few apps were pretty much like that. I wasn't terribly fast on delivery for them, but it wasn't costing anybody anything. And pretty much the word of mouth, which is really still how a lot of like our client work gets generated, kind of started with that and has never stopped. It's like I can still trace a lot of the the larger clients and sort of the repeating contracts that we have now as being a couple spiderweb steps removed from those first totally free projects.
Wow. So One of the things about Evil Genius Technologies that I find personally interesting is a little bit different from some of the things we talk about in the show, is that you have a minority business partner in that venture. How did you make that work? Why didn't you just go it alone? Why did you bring somebody else on?
It was a very organic process where at first, it was just Jesse, the solo programmer, kind of like hanging his shingle out there. And then I needed to, hire a few extra programmers to help with some auxiliary stuff. And then it got to the point where, well, gosh, it would be great to have somebody that's kind of running the business end of the shop, making sure the books are balanced and, maybe looking for more clients while I'm actually typing code and stuff like that. And so, I got in touch with a really good friend of mine, Ben, who I'd worked with in the film industry and known for years. And I knew he was sort of living this same Los Angeles thing of working on a film for a while, not having a job for a while, working on a film for a while. And like the economy was crap then in Los Angeles as far as people that were doing that sort of thing. Because, it wasn't just me that was hit by the sort of the blow to independent film production during those couple of years. It's like everybody that kind of worked in that arena was really scrambling for a while. So I just said, hey, Ben, I've got a pretty good thing going over here in the technology world. You want to come work with me on this for a while? And he's just, one of these guys who will, run repeatedly into the brick wall until eventually the brick wall gives way. And it just sort of made sense to give him, like an equity stake in the business as well as a salary. And so it's like...
And that's worked out for you.
Yeah, that's worked out well. And I hope he would think it worked out well for him as well.
Is there any part of you that thought about going to get one of those $150,000 jobs in Santa Monica? Why didn't you do that? Why did you scrape up projects and work for free?
Boy, that's a great question. And yeah, there was a part of me. In a way, that kind of felt like it would be transitioning out of film. Felt like I was betraying a large part of myself. I mean, I'd really moved to Los Angeles, at 22 years old.
You grew up where?
Oregon. Yeah,
okay.
West Coast kid, but yeah, I lived in a small town in Oregon, and yeah, basically after it was like, I'd been out of college for about a year, and then it was time to move to LA. It was like that had been the game plan. And I really moved there with the mentality of, I'm going to make it in LA or die trying, and to not live up to my ideals and to transition out of that career path without actually dying. I still, I wonder if I would be able to look my 22-year-old self in the face. Because, I mean, in a way, I kind of did betray that ideal, but it would have been an even worse betrayal to have gotten a job for the man. It's like, it's nice knowing that if you know technology well enough, there always kind of is the fallback of, well, I can go work for somebody else and make pretty good money. But that sure wouldn't. And also that felt weirdly permanent. It's like it just kind of felt like that would be, the hooks would be in deeper than they are with owning my own business. It's like, technically if I decided to sell off my client list or something to another developer and fold up shop on Evil Genius Technologies myself, it's like there could still be a pretty clean exit for me now, that if you decide to exit a job type job, there's nothing to hand it off to. I just don't even know how that would work.
Tell me about the digital nomad thing. Because you had a motorcycle, right? You had a nice place in the Hollywood Hills.
I miss my motorcycle, and I do miss my nice place. But
why did you give up that nice Los Angeles lifestyle and join this community of digital nomads? In some ways, I mean, you could have hung back in Los Angeles and made a bunch of money and been fine. Why did you find yourself in this scene?
Great question. I pretty much, like my first year of Evil Genius Technologies, 2011, I kind of did the cafe worker thing in Los Angeles. There was a couple of Starbucks that I would kind of rotate between, and I was one of those guys on the laptop, rocking out to whatever, and kind of living as a location irrelevant programmer in Los Angeles. And it occurred to me just kind of late in the year that, wow, it's like now that I'm fully divorced from film, there's no physical. It took a year for that to dawn on me, that like I don't need to be here. Like there's nothing actually holding me here other than sort of inertia and the fact that, of course, I had friends and a life and all that stuff. But I also kind of knew that if I left for a little while to do some traveling, that the friends and the life weren't going to disappear. People that are like going to not be your friend because you're gone for 18 months aren't your real friends anyway. So yeah, I just kind of figured it would be a good opportunity to do some traveling. And so here's the backstory on Dan and me. It was December of 2011 that I was thinking, I should travel and see some parts of the world that I haven't seen. I've always been curious about Bali. And so I started Googling around about like Bali and the internet because I wanted to see if there was Wi-Fi in Bali. And the first thing that popped up on Google was one of Dan's articles about being a digital nomad in Bali. And I'm like, lifestyle business podcast? What the hell is this? And that's, I think I signed up for your thing that night, and it started me down the whole, Dan and Ian rabbit hole, and here we are today.
That's crazy to me. What have been the advantages for you? I mean, let's talk a little bit about why did you set up shop here in Ho Chi Minh City?
I wish I could say that setting up shop in Ho Chi Minh City was more by design than by circumstance, but there's probably some of both. My first, even in 2011 when I was living fully in Los Angeles, I was working with overseas developers that I was trying to find people on Odesk and find people that I could hand off components within larger projects to that I could explain well enough where I could get something back and sort of tie it into the overall architecture that I was building. And so I was getting pretty used to working with people remotely and having employees and trying to kind of do that management process. And again, being a tech manager is kind of something I'm still learning as I go, and I feel like I'm groping around and give myself like probably a C- at best at my current skill level, but it's something that I'm working towards. So yeah, my first year kind of doing the digital nomad thing, it was the balls to the wall digital nomad thing. I was in 11 different countries, not counting airports and stuff like that, and kind of like moving every 3 or 4 weeks, was hit a lot of continents and sort of crossed a lot of things off the that sounds crazy, I want to do it list. And that was a lot of fun. And yeah, I mean, 2012 was like one of the best years of my life as far as that goes. But by the end of the year, I was a little burned on the high-paced travel because, I'm also into being healthy and trying some of the sort of like lifestyle stuff that you can't really optimize for when you're traveling that frequently. And so even though I kind of had 2 years as like a number in my head that I wanted to be outside the U.S. and kind of living abroad, I didn't want to be traveling at such a high pace this year. And so I was thinking, okay, well, if I wanted to kind of plant a flag in some city during 2013, where would that be? And there were a couple of cities that were sort of in the running. And I just decided I would sort of visit them in sequence and see if I hated one, I would move on to the next one. And Ho Chi Minh City was first on the list based on recommendations from John Myers and other people that I just sort of, reading along on the DC, different threads on the pros and cons on different things. But I'd never been here. I'd been to Vietnam a few years ago, but it was up in the north in Hanoi and had never made it to Ho Chi Minh City. And so I came here, tried it out for a couple weeks, really liked it, and I never made it to the next city on the list. And
let's talk about what you've created here, because I go over to your apartment. It's massive. It's on the 17th floor, whatever. It overlooks the city. You've got a studio in there with your logo on the wall and a bunch of kids working in there with you.
It's not a sweatshop. They're not kids. They're all over 18.
And it's just a pretty phenomenal place. You host a bunch of entrepreneurs there every weekend for your paleo breakfast. You've got personal servants and assistants everywhere. What an amazing thing to create. So explain it to us a little bit in terms of the numbers so that other people might, if they want to set up an offshore dev shop, how they might emulate what you've done, because I think that it's pretty fascinating opportunity for developers.
Yeah, the numbers are not as much as you would think. We sort of, I've got one roommate in this, rather large apartment. I've got a roommate, and we have a 5-bedroom, three bath place for, 2 single dudes. So it's definitely way bigger than we need to live in, but each of us have some employees for our respective teams. And we just kind of ran the numbers, and it made a lot of sense. And we decided, hey, do we want to get sort of a shorter term place and have the freedom to move in 3 months, or are we willing to kind of plunk down on a long-term lease? And again, it's like I'm used to living in Los Angeles where my cost of living was about $4,500 a month, and I don't even begin to touch that here. Hiring employees, it gets up to that, but the actual just cost of being me is I haven't broken that out as its own thing, but I would guess the cost of being me, if I factor in the parts of the apartment that I don't use for living as a business expense rather than a personal expense, is maybe $1,200, and that's at the upper end. And I mean, you could do it for way less than that.
Does that include your personal assistant and your maid?
No, that includes the maid, but not the personal assistant. Okay, so a moment's digression on maids. I've got a maid who does not speak a word of English, and I speak probably. Well, she speaks about 10 words of English. I speak about 10 words of Vietnamese, but we don't actually talk to one another because both of us are heavily accented and suck as far as that goes. But she is absolutely dollar for dollar the best employee I have, because the amount of time she saves me of just not ever doing laundry, I have not been to a grocery store in Saigon in 6 months plus. Just sorts of living things that if you can buy that time back cheaply, which even in America now that I know what an actual just huge upside is, buying back those hours, I would do it again in a heartbeat. So for a full-time maid/cook who cooks for myself 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, and cooks for my team during lunch. So a team of about 8 people in the office there, shows up at 7 in the morning, stays until 4:30 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday, and then comes for a half day on Saturday. We are paying $270 a month. And my girlfriend tells me that's too much, that I'm overpaying.
That's quite good.
So it's crazy. It's like the dollar, how much it costs me through Chow. Chow's the name of the maid. To buy back an hour of my own time is just crazy.
Talk to me about the developers here. What do you pay for them, ballpark, and are they any good? Like
developers anywhere, it's all over the map. As far as the upper, the right out of college range, for people that have just sort of popped out of the university, I think you can probably safely say you could hire a fresh out of college developer who probably doesn't really know too much, but they know enough to put some simple websites together and kind of to start learning more. But you wouldn't necessarily want them as your go-to employee for anything. Is probably about $275 to $325 a month. I've got one guy who's in that category who's sort of a long-term hire, somebody that I've got some of the senior members sort of training him. It's he's getting his sea legs under him, but he's not somebody that I would give a frontline project that needs to be bulletproof to. The upper end of the range here for a developer who's been working for maybe 8 years and has led some teams and really knows their stuff in whatever their, probably small handful of languages after that level of expertise is probably about $2,000 to maybe $2,200.
Wow.
But for that, like, you're going to get somebody that's a rock star, like a real rock star. And yeah, so I mean, even though the numbers are deflated from what you would see in the US, I feel like the multiplicative range of somebody at the upper end being like 8 times somebody at the bottom end, that's probably kind of the same as I think you'll find in most places. It's just that the cost of living here is so radically much less. I mean, there's some interesting things. I mean, you've probably talked about this plenty before with like, with Asian culture. It's like until people get married, they oftentimes live at home. And so if you just popped out of college and you're not married yet, you don't really have any cost of living. It's like you're still living at your parents. And
you've done this thing that, like the tropical MBA style, hire an expat or hire an intern.
Yeah.
What's your current view on that? Did that work out okay for you?
So I've got a kid named George from the UK who's over here in Ho Chi Minh City also, who either he convinced me or I convinced him to drop out of college. And I don't even remember, and I'm going to deny it anyway, in case his parents are listening to this episode. But yeah, to drop out of college and just basically start learning what it is to be like a freelance developer or sort of a freelance for hire dev shop. And he's been working for me for about 9 months now, and it's been doing great. He's been working on a variety of projects in different languages, and I've been sort of trying to throw him curveballs so he can kind of see what it's like to have to work with them. Because like when you're doing custom development work, which is what Evil Genius Technologies is the core business still is, you get requests for things in different languages with different database underpinnings and backbones, and interfacing with this API or this legacy system that some old company might have that they don't want to grow out of. And so there's a lot of you need to be very, very flexible. And whereas some of my employees that I know will be with me for a long time, I'm trying to really hone their skills in a particular thing, make this guy my ASP.NET go-to guy. Since George is more like I've got him for a year, maybe I've got him for 2 years, but then I know he's going to probably want to flap his wings and do something else. I'm trying to give him enough breadth of experience where he can kind of see what it's like to get those curveballs that being a freelance developer throws at you.
When we were at the Tropical MBA together, you had a pretty advanced business at the time, and you were cracking out some high-name projects. We just talked about you were doing work for David Allen in the past. I mean, you had some really interesting projects on your plate. So I remember a personal sense of anxiety when it came to podcasting day, because I was going to give a presentation on why everybody should start a podcast and what, the biggest mistakes that people make are and what you need to do. And I remember even looking at your face and being like, I am going to bore the crap out of that. He's going to fall asleep for the next hour. And I was really delighted to learn that you were excited by the presentation, and then comes Smart Drug Smarts.
You've told me this story before, and I've always been kind of surprised by it, because like the whole reason that I was there in the Philippines in this middle of nowhere island is because I like your podcast. It's like, well, but
I'm not that smart. So
Dan is self-effacing to the nth degree.
Tell me about this experience of you starting from scratch and putting up a super high quality, funny, interesting podcast. How's it changed your life? Like, what kind of perspective do you have? What about people who are listening to this podcast thinking, I've been kind of thinking about starting a podcast. You went out there and did it. What's your suggestion? What do you think? What have you learned?
Well, Smart Drug Smarts has been really, really fun for me because, I was working in Hollywood. It's like I was a movie guy. It's like that's a really creative outlet. I mean, there's business aspects to it too, but a lot of the client coding work that I had been doing for 2.5 years at that point was not necessarily something that was scratching my creative itch. And getting to do the podcast definitely felt like much more of a creative outlet, something where I wasn't working for a client, but like it was, I got to do what I thought made sense or was cool or whatever. I designed the logo myself and all that, and there wasn't anybody to say, hey, I don't like that color scheme, Lawler. And then, and so, yeah, that was really nice to have that creative outlet again. That's been one of the main things that it's done for me.
I think there's some interesting professional things that have happened with your show. I think you're in a highly monetizable niche. You're in a niche that not a lot of people are attacking. And then when you look at your track record, how many episodes do you have?
We just published number 20.
Okay, so you're on your 20th episode. You've spoken to PhDs. You've spoken to world-leading researchers, people with books that are published in real bookstores that know real things. You've spoken at a conference about this stuff. This is the message I'm trying to get out there. Don't just start the next podcast that's like, here's online productivity. if you focus it on something that's meaningful to people, to researchers, to industry, it can catapult you so fast.
Yeah, and I guess it's worth mentioning that, the whole podcast is like less than a year old at this point. And it's nothing to brag about, and certainly it's not a business yet. It's like I haven't done anything to monetize it. I'm not really sure what the long-term game plan for it is. Right now it's kind of a hobby project, but I think it is pretty cool and worth mentioning to people that, like, at this point there's a significant level of like listener traction with this thing, despite the fact it's gotten not nearly enough of my attention versus what I think it ideally should for less than a year. But 20 episodes and thousands of subscribers and all that stuff. So
a side project.
Yeah, as side projects go, it's not too bad. I
there
feel
are
like
people serving these niches with art. That's what I like. You can tell you're passionate about this topic.
Yeah.
You're doing the hard work. You're researching your interviews. You're reading crap. You're learning a ton. You're putting your art out there. This is just what I think is beautiful about social media and content marketing in general, is that you're going out there and being an advocate. You're not an MD. You're not a researcher. You're not an expert. You're just a guy who's willing to do the work for other people. And now people that go to Harvard and research for 10 years, they look to a guy like you who's somebody who can provide them with a ton of value because you can put their book in front of people.
Right. And that's been one of the things that's been, really cool about sort of this format of doing an interview-based podcast is, the first couple are hard because it's like you call somebody up and they're like, well, who are you? How do I know this is actually going to be published? It's like when you have your first one is like you got to convince somebody to talk with you for an hour that, you have nothing to show for yourself. But at this point, at least there's enough of a body of work where we can reasonably ask some pretty high-level people to come and, give 45 minutes of their time to talk on the show. And that's been awesome because it relieves me of the responsibility of needing to know decades worth of high-level research into this stuff. I can just be Jesse the interested guy, which I legitimately am, and get the right person on the show to feed the audience and me all kinds of information.
One person once said about you that if your willpower muscle were represented in a real muscle, it would be one of those grotesque bodybuilder biceps. and what this has allowed you to do is you've done a lot of self-experimentation over the years. You've been on a lot of radical different diets. You change your sleeping patterns regularly and kind of self-test. I find this really interesting about you. And I'm wondering if you could maybe take some combinations of some things you've learned on your show and some things from self-experimentation, maybe like the 80-20. What are some really simple things? Because it is true, you are an extremely productive person. You burn clean. You work hard. What are some things that have really, maybe some things people don't think about so much that you employ or that you've seen others employ to really live healthier, be more productive?
Yeah, okay, that's a great question. There's a lot of places to go with that. So I was talking with David Hayenberger a couple weeks ago, and he was asking sort of a similar thing about like, hey, Jesse, it seems like you put down a lot of hours of, what would be counted as productivity per day, like, what's the secret, blah, blah, blah. And I thought about it, and you kind of wished I had a better secret, but he's meeting me at Jesse the 36-year-old and didn't know Jesse the 24-year-old. And Jesse the 24-year-old was a hard-working guy too and a really ambitious guy too. But probably a lot of what you see now in Jesse the 36-year-old is just like sort of long-term habituated pruning of things that don't seem like they are beneficial to like the next iteration of myself. It's weird. It's like I feel like my worldview is very, very based on this lack of belief that I can predict what I'm going to want next. Mm-hmm. It's like I don't really know what Jesse the 40-year-old is going to be wanting or be after in his life, and so I'm just trying to think, okay, what can I do now to maximize this future incarnation of Jesse's options at that point? Keep his options open, make sure he's got resources to play with, and so that's sort of the my like test case or rubric.
So long-term thinking,
yeah,
and focus on habits, great habits. You're constantly tweaking habits, which I think is interesting. Let's talk some basic things. Do you drink coffee?
I do drink coffee. Here, let me give one habit which has been really useful for me, and I think is really easy to implement. It's pruning Fridays. Okay. Every Friday, I go through a little spreadsheet, and I'm not going to tell you where I keep it, that has things that I've wondered, like, is this really worth the effort that I'm putting into it? Is it worth the resources? Is it worth thinking about, blah, blah, blah. This could be projects. It could be other habits within my life. It could be people that I'm in contact with. It's sort of anything that's taking attention energy from me. And I just kind of do a little assessment like, hey, is this worth being here? And most Fridays I won't prune anything, but every now and then some pruning happens, and just like, that person's not getting return phone calls anymore, or that project's just got to be scrapped and I need to just suck it up and not deal with the fact that it's already cost time or cost money or whatever. But like kind of the religious pruning habit, I think has been really useful for me.
This is interesting. Taylor brings this up, and Talib mentioned it in Anti-Fragile, that when a lot of us want to make self-improvement, in particular Americans, we always think we need to add things. Mm-hmm. Like, I should go to the gym more, I should eat more apples, I should take supplements, I should join a program, I should buy a treadmill. And you and Taylor both take the opposite approach, which is like, I should just drink less coffee, I should stop going out, I should stop talking to vampires.
Wait a minute, let's not talk about drinking less coffee. I never said that.
Is there any of these smart drugs that you talk about on your show that you would regularly use?
Yeah, right now, well, I guess, by way of preamble, I feel like nootropics are a total waste of time if you're not going to get yourself physically healthy sort of the old-fashioned way first. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, the rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic, or putting a new coat of paint on a shitty piece of car, or whatever it is. It's like the biggest advantages I think that a person can get is going to be to make sort of their underlying plumbing and whatever their genetics gave them working as best as possible. And that's a combination of diet and exercise, and also I think like general positivity to the largest extent possible. I mean, I think we talk about mindset type stuff a lot, and I think there's actually some downsides to being optimistic, which we could go into. But overall, like,
you can look like a douche.
You certainly can.
So you're talking about proper sleep, exercise.
Yeah, diet is probably the fundamental building block for...
All right, that stuff's boring. I want to hear about...
Okay, never mind. You want to talk about drugs. Okay, smart drugs. Okay. Oh, what am I on right now? I've definitely got some caffeine in my system. I've probably got some residual modafinil from yesterday because it's got a long half-life to it.
A lot of people now are saying they're worried about modafinil. They're worried about the boomerang, so to speak. You get your high level... Are you seeing a negative impact of taking modafinil?
Well, I've talked with enough people about modafinil now that I've seen that it really does affect different people differently. I kind of tend, I guess personally, I'm in the lucky group that I haven't really seen much of a downside.
How do you decide when to take it?
I decide when to take it when I really want to sort of like drop in and focus. And it to a certain extent, it's almost like a ritual now that, like, if I want to go on, like, what I call in computer programming, I call it a code burn, just when I want to dive and attack a problem and not look up from my screen for 6 or 8 hours. It's like when I know a code burn is in the offing and it's something that needs to happen, like the modafinil 100 milligram pill is almost like a ritualistic thing for me. And how much of that is the modafinil itself now, and how much of it is my excitement about like the past times I've taken modafinil in that circumstance and have been effective for me. It's like there's certainly some positive placebo effects that get built into that as well.
Do you find that you overshoot the moon and then the next day you lose your rhythm a little bit and suffer, or can you keep the rhythm even though...
When I use modafinil as a sleep avoidance strategy, it is generally a bad idea. The sleep demons will catch up with you. But if I just use it to really kind of, taking it early in the day when it's not going to mess with my sleep that night, and I just want the alertness boost, I've seen no downside at all. And what's interesting is, and I think you could use it for a sleep avoidance strategy for a day, maybe 2 days. I don't think it's necessarily for long-term use. For people that haven't taken nootropics but have drank alcohol or smoked weed or something like that, and you kind of have these preconceived notions of what the feeling of being on a drug is, and it's hard to multiply that by -1 and think about what a drug would be like that would make you more focused.
Let's do this as a parting shot. Sometimes I try to wrap things up.
Sure.
What's the core, most interesting idea here? There's a lot of people in the audience that development is a core part of what they do. What you've done is kind of this interesting thing. I've seen it happen quite a few times over the last 4 or 5 years since I've been on the road. You relocate to the other side of the planet, you set up a home, and you turn it into a dev shop, and then eventually you move into an office building or whatever. Who is that good for? Is it good for everybody? I mean, should people even be running software companies in Omaha, Nebraska? Should they be here in Ho Chi Minh City? Who should follow in your footsteps, and what can they learn from you?
That's an interesting question. I mean, so I didn't have the wife and kids, kind of anchoring me to a spot. So it was easier for me to do that. If somebody wants to run a dev shop, they pretty much need to be a developer, I think, themselves, or it's like the business is so built into the tech that you can't extricate yourself from that. And I think it's really useful, especially with like hiring and finding out, like as you're working with the developers whom you hire, sort of the growth of any relationship, you're going to find out different people's strengths and weaknesses, and this person's good at that, they're not so good at that. I think it's really helpful to be in the same physical location with your developers as you're kind of learning those strengths and weaknesses, so you can kind of figure out how to properly assign things. So I don't think it's a business that could be done remotely, at least not in its early stages. So I think if you want to run a remote dev shop, you pretty much do need to be willing to relocate. A lot of people ask me, like, well, what's it like living in a country where you don't speak the language? And it's shockingly easy, as you know. It's like, it's weird being a functional illiterate, but there's always ways around that. And having the finances on your side, as far as just the low cost of living, it's like you can buy your way out of that problem really easily.
You said that for certain performers, you're getting 8 times cost performance. Now,
no, actually, that what I was saying there is probably the highest paid guys are getting about 8 times the lowest paid guys. Like that was sort of the range.
Okay, so how would you then compare? The entry-level developer here is making $400 a month.
Right.
The entry-level developer back home is making $65,000 a year.
Yeah.
Now, those are just salary numbers. What would you think is the real productivity numbers? Have you ever thought about that? Like if you would have one guy or two people, 2 gals back in California versus, well, you'd already be beyond your payroll here of 10 people, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, so I haven't, hired enough people over the course of my career to have a statistically relevant sample size in mind. But I mean, I can kind of think of the people that I went to computer science classes with in the U.S. when I was in college as sort of an average sample pool. I feel like probably the average education of a graduating computer science person is definitely higher in the U.S. than it is here. I feel like there's probably a lot more societally endemic, like thinking your way around corners that we have in the West than I've seen in like developers from parts of the developing world. And I don't know if that's a problem with the education system here or just sort of a cultural thing. But I've definitely had experiences where like when I was in Los Angeles in 2011 and I was working with developers in India, which is 11 and a half hours time difference. And so I would stay up late to try to work with them. But eventually it's like even I've got to sleep. So I would give my assignments, work with them, hold hands over Skype and stuff for the first couple of hours. But then it's like, okay, guys, I'm going to sleep. I'll see you in the morning. And more than once had the experience of, well, an hour and a half after I went to bed, they ran into some problem that wasn't what they foresaw. And they just all work stops. Like, wait for Jesse to wake up and give further instructions. And it's like, the further instruction is, well, figure it out, man. It's like, that's what you do. It's like you debug, work your way around that problem. So much of programming is coming up with the algorithm. An algorithm is a process that will inevitably lead to some result if you follow it all the way through. And like that's part and parcel. It's not just memorizing these arcane syntax things. It's like figuring out what the sequential steps are to reach a result. And that's got to be the programmer's first job. It's like all the syntax is kind of secondary stuff. But what I've found is training people that like that's part of the job too is something which everybody in the US that I went to school with kind of came out knowing, and people don't necessarily come out of school knowing about that part of the whole process here.
So that's part of being in person with them.
Yeah, and just, kind of, people get it once they get it, but giving people the freedom, like, no, you've got to think your way through this yourself. Like, what would you do if you were the one in the burning house? Are you just going to wait for somebody to give you instructions? It's like, no, you got to find the door.
Well, Jesse, I hope we can have you back on the show.
No way, man. No way.
Talk about our valet parking software that we're collaborating on. We've got a lot of exciting tales to tell, but
absolutely,
we're going to get some customers in there first and see what they think before we come and share those lessons. That's Jesse from Evil Genius Technologies and the Smart Drugs Smarts podcast. It's always a pleasure to have you here, Jesse. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dan. My pleasure.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Tropical MBA podcast. You can go to tropicalmba.com, get access to hundreds of back episodes and all kinds of other goodies. Load up your iPod. That is the cheapest way to fly business class on your next international flight. We will see you next Thursday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time.